Perdana Menteri mahu tumpu kepada pembaharuan ekonomi domestik sebelum memperluas kerjasama melalui ASEAN dan rakan dagang utama lain. Ketua Polis Daerah Dangwangi, Asisten Komisioner Sulizmi Afandi Sulaiman sahkan terima makluman mengenai hasrat sekumpulan badan bukan kerajaan NGO untuk mengajukan satu perhimpunan di Ibu Negara pada Sabtu ini. Perdana Menteri Israel Benjamin Netanyahu beri syarat perang Gaza akan ditamatkan sekiranya Hamas lucut sepenuhnya senjata mereka. Ikuti liputan berita dan analisis menyeluruh setiap hari di saluran 501 dan astroawani.com.
Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Saya Najib Aroff dan ini Niaga Awani. Kita mulakan dengan perkembangan utama untuk jam ini. Model pekerjaan siswazah Malaysia kini berdepan krisis struktur yang mendalam apabila pendidikan tinggi tidak lagi menjamin pulangan upah yang bermakna. Menambah buruk situasi, siswazah di negara ini hanya memperoleh pendapatan cukup makan tanpa ruang untuk menyimpan, melabur atau meningkatkan mobiliti sosial mereka.
Perkara itu didedahkan menerusi laporan bertajuk The Gaji Cukup Makan Ekonomi When Higher Education Becomes an Economic Risk yang dibangunkan oleh Pusat Kajian Masa Depan Pasaran Buruh (EUERA) di bawah Future Studies Berhad The Future. Meskipun kadar kebolehpasaran siswazah sering dilaporkan melebihi 80%, laporan itu menegaskan bahawa angka tersebut boleh mengelirukan kerana ia merangkumi semua bentuk pekerjaan tanpa mengambil kira padanan kemahiran atau tahap upah. Hakikatnya lebih 70% siswazah bekerja dalam sektor separa mahir dan tidak mahir dan lebih 65% pemegang ijazah memperoleh gaji bulanan di bawah RM3,000. Ketidakpadanan yang meluas antara kelayakan akademik dan pekerjaan ini mencerminkan kemerosotan serius dalam pulangan pelaburan pendidikan tinggi. Walaupun isu ketidakpadanan siswazah turut berlaku di negara maju, The Future menjelaskan bahawa situasi di Malaysia berada di tahap yang lebih buruk. Ini disebabkan paras gaji rendah sekaligus tidak memberi ruang perlindungan kepada mereka yang terlibat dalam pekerjaan di bawah kelayakan. Ini menyebabkan ketidakpadanan di Malaysia memberi kesan ekonomi yang lebih mendalam, menghadkan mobiliti sosial dan mengurangkan minat untuk melanjutkan pelajaran ke peringkat lebih tinggi, khususnya dalam kalangan golongan berpendapatan rendah dan sederhana. Dalam konteks ini, keputusan untuk melanjutkan pelajaran semakin berisiko dari sudut ekonomi, khususnya bagi belia yang perlu menanggung kos pendidikan yang semakin tinggi, sedangkan pulangan gaji yang diterima tidak setimpal. Laporan itu turut mendedahkan bahawa jurang yang semakin melebar antara kelayakan, kualiti pekerjaan dan ganjaran tersebut mencabar kepercayaan tradisional bahawa pendidikan adalah laluan kepada mobiliti sosial. Antara punca kepada permasalahan tersebut adalah pertumbuhan gaji yang perlahan, kelemahan dalam penyediaan pra-pekerjaan dan permintaan kemahiran yang lemah dari sektor swasta. Faktor-faktor ini katanya telah mewujudkan trajektori gaji yang mendatar dan tertangguh di mana siswazah gagal membezakan diri mereka dari segi pendapatan berbanding bukan siswazah, terutamanya pada fasa awal kerjaya.
Krisis struktur berkait model pekerjaan siswazah Malaysia yang semakin memburuk memerlukan langkah reformasi yang berani. Pusat Kajian Masa Depan Pasaran Buruh EUERA di bawah Future Studies Berhad berkata, langkah itu penting bagi merangka campur tangan dasar yang sesuai berasaskan realiti siswazah merentasi pelbagai sektor, kumpulan demografi dan laluan pendidikan.
Antara langkah yang dicadangkan adalah menggantikan indikator kebolehpasaran yang mengelirukan dengan ukuran padanan kemahiran, mewujudkan sistem penjejakan hasil siswazah jangka panjang, menyusun semula program latihan industri dan laluan pra-pekerjaan, memacu pemodenan industri dan reka bentuk semula pekerjaan dan memperkenalkan garis panduan upah sebagai alat penasihat bagi menangani tekanan gaji rendah. Laporan tersebut turut mengemukakan satu kerangka dasar holistik yang mengintegrasikan perancangan pendidikan, permintaan pasaran buruh dan hasil upah melangkaui pendekatan berpecah-pecah kepada strategi nasional berasaskan hasil yang lebih padu dan terselaras. Laporan bertajuk The Gaji Cukup Makan Ekonomi When Higher Education Becomes an Economic Risk menyediakan perspektif makro terhadap cabaran struktur dalam pasaran buruh siswazah di Malaysia. Ia turut menawarkan diagnosis menyeluruh mengenai penindasan gaji, ketidakpadanan kemahiran dan ketidakcekapan dalam laluan pendidikan kepekerjaan. Di samping menyorot jurang dasar yang kritikal, laporan itu turut menyeru kajian lanjut secara mendalam agar penemuan-penemuan ini dapat diterjemahkan kepada reformasi yang lebih bersasar dan berimpak tinggi.
As one of the participants at Lima 2025, FGV is presenting a range of integrated digital and also logistics solutions, reflecting its growing interest in supporting the maritime and also aerospace sectors. And of course, with a focus on innovation and collaboration, the company aims to explore new opportunities, engage with stakeholders, and expand its presence in both regional and also global markets. To talk further about this, joining us this morning is Azmi Yaakob, Chief Strategic Communication Officer FGV. Azmi, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what are the key objectives for FGV's participation in Lima 2025, and how do they basically support your broader strategic direction?
Okay, Assalamualaikum and very good morning, Najib. For today, we are actually doing a live telecast from Hall A at the Masuri International Convention Center. This is actually our 8th participation for FGV Holdings Group for Lima 2025, and we are here as a group, and a lot of people know FGV Holdings Berhad as global producers of crude palm oil, but not many know that as part of the offerings for the group, we are also offering the integrated digital and logistics solutions for our business partners and customers. So for the 8th time this year, 2025, we are participating again under the group, showcasing 2 of our main business divisions. And this is actually run through our 2 main subsidiaries, FGV Prodata System Sdn Bhd, as well as FGV Transport Services Sdn Bhd, basically offering integrated digital and logistics solutions for our business customers who are actually present here at the exhibition, as well as the global and regional players of the maritime and aerospace industry. So we hope that by having this kind of presence, we actually create more visibility on the FGV as a brand, as a global brand rather, and also trying to actually create awareness in terms of the logistics and digital offerings that FGV can offer as a company itself. So it's a double sword approach, Najib, in terms of showcasing our brand and creating more awareness on the offerings on digital and logistics as well.
Yeah, since you are there at Lima 2025, help us to understand better, because are there any specific technologies or platforms or services in that sense, being highlighted at this year's exhibition in regards to your own services itself?
Will do, Najib. I think as I mentioned earlier, I think our focus this year is actually on logistics and the digital solutions. And I think as you may know, we are actually quite mature in other industries for FGV itself, but we are actually very new in the maritime and aerospace sectors when Lima is concerned. So I think this is where we actually have a presence here in Lima this year, to further explore this new market, especially on maritime and aerospace industries, in providing the related integrated logistics and digital solution as a whole. So I think some of the highlights of our technologies that I perhaps could highlight today, especially in terms of our digital solutions, offered through Prodata System Sdn Bhd, include the bridge simulator, ataupun simulator jambatan untuk Navy vessels navigation. This is actually solely done for vessel of the Navy in terms of navigation, providing simulations of the bridge, as well as the action speed tactical trainer, which is actually a simulator used for the warfare tactical training as well. So these are some of the highlights in terms of technologies that FGV Prodata Systems, our digital solutions arm, in terms of providing these offerings and services to the current and potential business customers who are actually present here at Lima itself, not just for the regional players, but also for the global players as well. And I think for the transport itself, I think some of the highlights that we're actually offering in terms of technology would actually include things like the multimodal transport operator, which is actually integrated logistics solutions under one contract or provider, our transport management services, distribution center services, as well as our international courier services. So these are some of the highlights, Najib, in terms of our specific technologies and platforms that we're actually highlighting at this year's Lima.
But how does FGV, see exhibitions such as Lima help local companies, benchmark against global standards and, uncover new business opportunities?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, Najib. I think it's very important for a local company like FGV itself to further create their visibility and business presence, especially at a global platform like Lima itself. Basically trying to prove that we are as capable as the other global players in terms of offering the logistics and digital solutions as well. So that's why we are here. And I think it's also important that we prove to the world that we are actually capable as well in terms of our technologies, in terms of our innovations, and we'll be able to actually compete with the other regional and global players in terms of our technologies, in terms of our innovations. And I think the platform of us here, being here, meeting face to face with our business partners, would actually enable us to speak to them directly in terms of understanding the requirements for the solutions, in terms of technology, in terms of innovation. And I think the hot topic of the town nowadays in terms of how we can actually integrate the ESG elements or sustainability elements into our product offerings and services as well, Najib.
Yeah, Asmin, what's your hope and FGV's hope in terms of how might the exposure and also interactions with clients, B2B, business to business interactions at Lima 2025, from this event will influence FGV's future product development or market strategies?
Yes, definitely. I think we have proven ourselves in terms of some of the contracts that we have actually done for the ministries and agencies, especially in Malaysia. But we are talking about future business growth. We cannot just be relying on what we do nowadays. And I think this is actually another big reason why actually here at Lima in terms of trying to secure new contracts from new players of the industry as well. And as I mentioned earlier, as a local company, we are as capable as the other global players in terms of offering our solutions, logistics and digital. And of course, while doing this, we want to further showcase our ability in terms of innovations as well as how we actually integrate ESG and sustainability requirements into our products offerings and solutions. And I think I want to highlight as well for FGV itself, FGV Transport Services in Berhad, we have been embracing sustainability in our operations. For transport itself, we actually been getting quite a number of our EV fleets, quite a number of our fleets are actually powered by EV. This is actually a way of contributing to the sustainability environment in terms of ESG, giving back to the environment, doing our business, but at the same time protecting the environment as one of our pillars. Also part of our sustainability roadmap for FGV Group as well in general. So we want to compete with the global players, but we want to have a competitive advantage. It's not just in terms of the product and services, innovations, but also embracing ESG sustainability as a way forward.
All right, Azmi, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That is Azmi Yaakob, Chief Strategic Communication Officer, FGV at Lima 2025. Pameran Antarabangsa Maritim dan Aeroangkasa Langkawi 5 edisi ke-17 terus memukau dengan aksi berani dan penuh gaya menerusi pertunjukan udara. Namun di sebalik setiap gerakan ekstrim itu, tersembunyi disiplin, latihan dan kisah luar biasa seorang juruterbang. Dari Pusat Pameran Antarabangsa Mahsuri, wartawan Nabilah Khaleeda dan juru kamera Sujentiran Rajandram ada laporannya.
Di sebalik kepulan asap dan dentuman enjin di langit Langkawi, terselit satu semangat kental dan disiplin tinggi. Inilah jiwa di sebalik Gimbird Aerobatic Malaysia, Captain John atau lebih dikenali sebagai Scratchman.
Captain John Sham daripada Layang-Layang Flying Academy. Bermulanya minat saya dalam aerobatik adalah semasa saya berkhidmat di TUDM. Perkhidmatan saya di TUDM selama 26 tahun daripada tahun 1993. Minat kepada aerobatik ini sebenarnya daripada mulanya saya terbang di TUDM, sebab kalau tak silap saya adalah pada tahun 1995 terdapat there was a group that was called Benson and Hedges Aerobatic Team. So semasa dia perform di Langkawi ni, they gave me an opportunity untuk terbang bersama mereka. So daripada itulah saya memang minat saya kepada aerobatic ataupun air display ni I would say started growing lah. Dan dalam pada itu semasa saya berkhidmat di TUDM, memang that's bread and butter for all fighter pilots. So I was selected to be a fighter pilot dalam penerbangan fighter ataupun dalam training fighter pilot ni. Sebenarnya one of the basic adalah aerobatic. So aerobatic is basically the core training of a fighter pilot lah.
Beliau telah mencatat sejarah sebagai jurulatih aerobatik dan advance UPRT pertama dari sektor awam yang diiktiraf secara rasmi oleh pihak berkuasa Penerbangan Awam Malaysia CAAM.
Terus terang, perasaan gemuruh ataupun perasaan nervous memang ada kepada semua air display pilot. Okay? Tetapi I would say kadar kegemuruhan ataupun the nervousness tu, it depends on how we control ourselves. So our mental stability and emotional stability amatlah penting. Kita kena control keadaan mental dan keadaan emosi kita supaya ia tidak akan menjejaskan rutin kita. Yang penting dalam satu air display adalah rutin. Sebagai contoh, rutin saya berbeza. So rutin saya I would say berasaskan dynamic of the flight. So I have a flat show, I have vertical, then I have horizontal, banyak. So rutin tu I have memorized kan. So that's why I say sometimes the crowd can jeopardize kita punya rutin. So therefore bagi saya, bila saya walk up kepada pesawat tu, saya tak nampak siapa-siapa lagi lah. I only see my plane and the sky.
Pesawat GB-1 Gamebird yang dikemudi Kapten John merupakan pesawat aerobatik pertama didaftarkan secara rasmi di Malaysia dan mula mencuri tumpuan sejak debutnya di 5 2023.
Okay, for that show, the rehearsal took me about five rehearsals here in Langkawi. Then before that, di Ipoh, I also did a rehearsal lah. So rehearsal dari segi mental is the different thing now. So this is basically flying rehearsal ataupun practice. Air display practice ni akan diberlakukan pada altitude yang tinggi. Mula-mulanya, we will go about 5,000 feet. Dia bergantung pada juruterbang. So my planning basically, saya akan bermula training saya pada altitude 5,000 kaki, then slowly I will bring it down to 4, 3, 2, 1,000. So dalam semasa I step down the altitude, I become more confident lah. Itulah persediaan kepada pilot. Then ada 3 faktor kan tadi. The pertama sekali man, second machine, then the third one is medium of operation.
Layang-layang Flying Academy kini melakar nama sebagai akademi pertama di Asia Tenggara yang menawarkan latihan aerobatik dan UPRT bertaraf antarabangsa sekaligus mengukuhkan keselamatan penerbangan dan menarik minat bakat serantau. Daripada kokpit pejuang ke pesawat aerobatik, Kapten John bukan hanya menerbangkan pesawat tetapi harapan dan legasi. Di 5 2025, beliau bukan saja membuat persembahan udara tetapi membuktikan bahawa langit bukan lagi batasnya. Saya Nabilah Khaleeda dan jurukamera Sujan Tiran kembali ke studio.
The US stocks closed sharply lower on Wednesday as Treasury yields spiked on worries that government debt would swell by trillions of dollars if Congress passes US President Donald Trump's proposed tax cut bill. All 3 major Wall Street indexes closed with their biggest daily losses in a month. Small-cap stocks also fell sharply, with Russell 2000 index recorded its biggest daily loss since April 10. Larger dated Treasury yields rose after soft demand from investors in a $16 billion sale of 20-year bonds by the Treasury Department. The yield on benchmark US 10-year notes rose 11.5 basis points to 4.597%. During the sessions, the 10-year yield hit its highest since mid-February.
today is another wild, volatile day in the markets, opened down, fought back. And then the major thing that happened was that interest rates went up. And so we had a 20-year auction. It did not go extremely well. It actually went pretty poorly, as the last two have now. So interest rates shot up across the board. It went up over 10 basis points over the 20-year and over the 30-year yield. And that's problematic. As we get through 5%, which now we are clearly through, it tends to gum up the works in the economy, in terms of consumer confidence, in terms of the stock market. And it's one of the big indicators that we're keeping an eye on right now. How much further can we go through 5%, or hopefully yields have peaked here? Where do we sit? Well, we still have a tariff threat, and now we have earnings that are looking like they may roll over for next quarter if you just listen to management commentary and if you looked at guidance, which has been weaker. So again, the market's trying to digest all of this, and the ultimate arbiter right now is the bond market, and it is in bond yields. And with yields going up, that's also going to put additional pressure on the stock market. So I think that's why after this huge rally, we've kind of felt some weakness here in the past few days.
A congressional committee set an unusual hearing as House Republicans sought to overcome internal divisions over proposed budget cuts, including to the Medicaid health program. Non-partisan analysts said the Republican bill could add between $3 trillion to $5 trillion to the federal government's $36.2 trillion debt. Now let's break down what's happening in the US stock market. Let's look at the S&P 500 as of this morning. All the major mega capitalization counter as of this morning, such as Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, Amazon, were in red color, meaning it was down over the last over the course of trading last night and yesterday, Wednesday. And I want to look at the counter with a small capitalization, such as under the consumer defensive, which is the Walmart, Costco, Target, etc. But I want to look at the healthcare for a while, because for the last few days, we've seen healthcare, especially United Health, was down by 20%, I think, few days ago. But today, as of last night, 5.78% it was down. And of course, the new update about United Health, as of this morning, United Health shares fell more than 6% on Wednesday after the UK's Guardian newspaper reported the company made secret payments to nursing homes to reduce hospital transfers, adding to woes of the healthcare conglomerate. The alleged action, part of a series of cost-cutting tactics, has saved the company millions, but at times risked residents' health, the Guardian reported, citing an investigation. The allegations add to the negatives that have hurt United Health following a cyber attack at its Change Healthcare unit. Reports of criminal and also civil probes on company's practices and the departure of CEO Andrew Whitty, who resigned. And also shares have stumbled all year, losing more than 39% compared to just 0.6% decrease for Dow. United Health said in response that the U.S. Department of Justice investigated these allegations, interviewed witnesses, and obtained thousands of documents that demonstrated the significant factual inaccuracies in the allegations. The company said the DOJ declined to pursue the matter after reviewing all the evidence during its multi-year investigation. And now, let's take a look at the stock that took a serious hit from Trump's tariffs, which landed hardest on consumer defensive sector. Of course, the first one, we're going to look at the Target. Target is over here. Target was down by 5.21%, as well as Costco was down by 1.11%, and Walmart as well. Walmart was down by 1.40% as of last night at S&P 500. Of course, in terms of Target, Target slashed its annual sales forecast on Wednesday after surprisingly sharp fall in quarterly same-store sales as customers pull back on discretionary purchases due to ongoing worries about inflation and the economy due to the U.S. President Donald Trump's trade war. Target also said its first quarter performance was affected by negative reactions to its pullback on diversity, equity, and also inclusion policies, DEI, in January, which angered some loyal customers who have long praised the company's commitment to inclusiveness. And of course, Target has struggled with merchandise missteps, also retail crime and inventory management. Over the past year, it has faced challenges in maintaining steady sales growth. dealt with boycotts and, of course, lawsuits related to its DEI practices, and also relied heavily on sourcing from countries where Donald Trump has placed broad-based tariffs. And, of course, in terms of Walmart, the update about Walmart, as of this morning, retail bellwether, Walmart plans to cut about 1,500 jobs as part of the restructuring plan to lower expenses, the Wall Street Journal reported on Wednesday, citing a person familiar with the matter. And of course, the company's plan will impact teams in its global technology operations, which is e-commerce fulfillment in US stores, and its advertising business, Walmart Connect, the report said. Of course, Walmart is the largest US private employer with about 1.6 million employees. It employed about 2.1 million employees worldwide in total, according to its website. It is also the country's biggest importer, with about 60% of its imports, mainly items such as the clothing, electronics, and toys, are from China. The company said last week it would raise prices for some products by the end of May as President Donald Trump's trade war hits its supply chains. That's all for me. We're going to go with Ibrahim Sani after we take a short break.
Nak coklat? Hari ni tak boleh. Nanti saya kena dengan mak saya.
Pepsodent baharu disahkan halal. Mikrokalsium aktif dan Pro-Florida kompleks membantu memperbaiki lubang halus akibat makanan manis sebelum menjadi kaviti untuk pelindungan maksimum. Pepsodent.
Uniform Tentera Darat Malaysia TADM bagi peserta program latihan khidmat negara tidak seharusnya menjadi isu hangat.
Jenayah penipuan pelaburan mencatatkan jumlah kerugian tertinggi pada tahun ini setakat 2 Februari lalu.
Kementerian Pendidikan memandang serius isu peningkatan trend penggunaan rokok elektronik.
Lembaga Lebuh Raya Malaysia LLM memperluaskan larangan kenderaan berat memasuki lebuh raya pada waktu puncak di beberapa jajaran terpilih di sekitar Lembah Kelam.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. We're currently at the office of the Khazanah Research Institute. Joining me is the research advisor of KRI, none other than the esteemed gentleman, Professor Dr. Jomo Kwame Sundaram. Prof. Jomo, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us. Ahead of the ASEAN Summit that's going to take place over the next 2 days, we expect a lot of, overtures and rhetoric that has been given by various leaders, and against a backdrop of clarity, I suppose. If we were to do this conversation 3 weeks ago, maybe a little bit of uncertainty coming from China and US. Now it's getting a little bit clearer. Do you think that substantial conversations can be made from this ASEAN Summit, or it's still more of show and tell?
I seriously doubt there's much time for show and tell. So I think if we want to go forward, I think we have to focus, not try to do everything in the world, but focus on a few things. And I think the 2 things which are most relevant for us in the world today, beyond ASEAN in a sense, is the relevance, the continuing relevance of ZOPFAN, the Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality. This year also happens to be the 70th anniversary of the non-aligned movement, and it was also the end of World War II 80 years ago. So we have a number of anniversaries, but we have also lost a sense of purpose, not only in ASEAN, within the world. There is very little commitment, for example, to creating the conditions for peace. Okay? There's very little commitment in many parts of the world about freedom, and certainly not about neutrality. We have a world now which is emerging. It is sometimes called a unipolar world. For others, it is a multipolar world. But whatever it is, we cannot afford to be aligned with any particular power.
But isn't that the mantra of ASEAN, the non-intervention policy, tying up with ZOPFAN, tying up with the kind of peace that we currently have, so to speak, to some degree in ASEAN? It's all very consistent, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very consistent if you do nothing, right? You can say that we are committed to peace, but do nothing about it. or you can actually try to lead in terms of peacemaking. Who is leading in terms of peacemaking? The United Nations is increasingly marginalized by the major powers. Nobody pays attention, especially in the US, but also in Europe. They have been intervening in all kinds of countries, in various situations. In fact, the interventions since the end of the Cold War are greater than the interventions during the Cold War period. So we have a situation where, well, let us be modest about our real capacities. So we cannot really lead in terms of peacemaking. We do not have enough coherence and capacity to do that. But nonetheless, to be a voice for reason, for peace, for freedom and neutrality, and very importantly, I think, for the current period, is development. The world economy is going into stagnation. This is being led particularly by the West, and nobody is resisting. And this is why I think the other thrust of what should be done at this summit is the whole question of ASEAN plus 3. We already have the economic institution for it, namely the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive and Economic Partnership, and we need to make that significant. For example, before President Trump announced his tariffs, right, on the 2nd of April, the governments of China, Japan, and Korea, not South Korea, got together and they were discussing. Now, these are the plus 3. What happened to ASEAN? You see, ASEAN was not involved. In the old days, the plus 3 couldn't meet without ASEAN. We were the glue which brought plus 3 together. Today, we have become increasingly irrelevant, partly because we have been reluctant to move forward. The Chiang Mai Agreement was about 2.5 decades ago, a quarter of a century ago, and how much progress have we actually made? The big progress made was moving from a series of bilateral swap arrangements to a multilateral swap arrangement. We have not done very much since then. Some governments have been calling for an Asian monetary fund, and so on. But what has happened on it? The Prime Minister was in Beijing at Tsinghua University, I think in April or May 2 years ago, and he talked about this. But nobody has done anything about it since then. The governor of the Bank of Korea, Lee Chang-yong, has been advocating this for many years. But what has ASEAN Plus 3 done? What has RCEP done? We do not have any ongoing developments as far as RCEP is concerned. And now, more than ever, the plus 3 are very, very concerned. The plus 3 have been brought together, thanks to Mr. Trump, you might say. But the fact is that we are at the cusp of a possible turning point. Are we going to seize that opportunity? Are we going to provide that kind of leadership which is needed at this moment? I don't see it happening.
Let's talk a little bit more about prescriptive diagnosis here. Why do you think ASEAN has been static in these overtures or making this monumental growth and taking the step forward to lead? Is it because of individual markets having issues with their own democracies? Or is it because there's not enough of a strongman figure to coalesce these forces together and follow that kind of leader? Or do you feel that we're still, I guess, managing our own affairs so much so that getting or banding together to build a regional movement and building a way forward is still a bit too hard for us to grapple with? Maybe not now.
Well, I don't hang around with these people, so I can't really speak to what the problem is, okay? But I think it is quite clear that there is very little collective inclination to move in that direction. As I said, the plus 3 are moving ahead. The ASEAN is not moving ahead. And understandably, there are differences. I mean, what are the commonalities, for example, between Laos or, let us say, East Timor with Singapore. Okay, you know, they are all small economies physically, but you know, so it is not easy to find common ground to agree on much, and of course there have been diplomats or ex-diplomats who have been saying that there's no future in ASEAN and so on and so forth, and they have a point because of the diversity of the region. But at this point, it's not talking about a huge expansion of what we are talking about. Essentially is defensive. Okay, Mr. Trump has challenged the world. Okay, I'm not saying that we take on Mr. Trump. There's no particular reason to do so. But basically, I think the world is in turmoil right now. US and Europe are not on the same page. We have a situation where we need to identify what the future of this region is, and we have a huge opportunity. And we have seen, particularly at the end of March, we have seen the ministers economic ministers in the +3 getting together and trying to talk about moving forward. And I think that opens up a huge opportunity. So the question is, I'm not talking about something very grandiose or, you know, a huge boost. That's not going to happen easily. Really, what we need to do is identify the current problems and try to address them and to move forward. We have some institutions. Those institutions are hardly being used.
It's evident that you're bearish on the market prospects of ASEAN as a collective. Do you feel that that whole notion of, you know, we've been saying this for a long time. ASEAN is a big market. If we band together, it's a population of 600 million, GDP, you know, bigger than China. If you put it together, you know, these kind of, you know, mathematically they're not wrong to make these kind of arguments, but we have never been able to actually capitalize on this kind of market. And do you feel that we can never realize these kind of opportunities, and therefore each market within ASEAN is left to fend by themselves and pursue their own fate individually?
Well, I think there's no particular reason for why we should force economic integration. If you look, for example, at Europe even has a common currency. How has it served them well? I can tell you the Greek population, the Greek nation will tell you certainly not. You know, so I think we need to learn.
It served Germany and France well, though.
Sorry?
Yeah, it served Germany and France well in terms of common market.
These are big countries which dominate and take advantage of this. And we should learn such lessons to ensure that it doesn't happen. For example, if you have more developments in the region, in the East Asian region, you know, we have institutions. We are not making use of those institutions. I mean, getting the RCEP is a major step forward. But have you heard of an RCEP meeting? You know, have you heard about cooperation within the region? No. The fact of the matter is that we have a lot of talking, a lot of posturing, you know, photo ops and so on and so forth. But when we talk about actual concrete developments, I'm not talking about some huge scheme, you know, as with Europe. Europe had particular problems. They tried to solve their problems. The whole point of creating the European Union was actually peace, you know.
And post-World War II.
Right, especially the history of centuries of conflict between France and Germany and so on and so forth. But what do we have now? Europe is leading the world in terms of war. The whole, they are fighting against Russia to the last Ukrainian. I mean, it's you know, it's no secret, right? So you can have a celebration 2 weeks ago, for example, of 80 years of the end of World War II, and you have the celebration of the European Union as a project, a peace project. But what is being done? Next to nothing. I'm not suggesting there's nothing to be learned from. There is a lot to learn from the European Union. But when do we ever have a serious discussion of that? When do we have a serious discussion of economic integration in other parts of the world?
So if economic integration need not be a primary agenda for ASEAN, And if the two areas of concern that you have posited earlier when we started this conversation is more of ZOPFAN and ASEAN Plus 3, do you feel that that is on the same wavelength as these ministerial officials that are, or the delegates that are coming to KL to have this conference, and the leaders that are flying in and having this meeting? Do you think that that is on the same wavelength as them, or do you feel that we're still a bit too wayward in terms of what we want to achieve coming out of this summit?
I think if the ministers are serious, and I think they are, they know that there are these procedural process kinds of things where you come, you take your photos and so on and so forth. But the heavy lifting has to be done by the so-called Sherpas. Okay, have they done the work? Have they negotiated and started talking about these things? Now, if we keep on talking about ASEAN on the economic side, I don't think we're going to get very far. But if we talk about ASEAN Plus 3, we talk about RCEP, we talk about MRO and so on and so forth, I think we will have a higher level of discussion. It's not going to be easy to solve these problems. I mean, these are very, very different economies and so on. We happen to be in this particular part of the world. But other than that, there's very little which we have in common. But have we explored the possibilities of actually looking at some of these issues and trying to see the commonality of moving forward? Unfortunately, I don't think there has been any momentum. The Chiang Mai process is basically over. It's about a quarter of a century ago. And we don't see any serious discussion. Okay. And one of the big problems is that for the last 30, 40 years, every time we talk about regional cooperation, most people talk about is, free trade area, free trade area. And there are some people, congenitally, they have nothing to say about regional cooperation except free trade. You know, I mean, it's nonsense. I mean, the whole world has seen all kinds of other types of cooperation, but all we can do is do that. I've seen, there are people, including friends of mine, who have never seen anything with the label free trade, which they don't like. Everything you put label free trade, we'll do. You look at free trade agreements which are being made now, most of them the trade content is very minuscule. Okay, what do you see? Investment agreements, investment guarantees for foreign direct investment. Those are the things which are in so-called free trade agreements. So we don't even know what we are doing, you know, half the time. And then, you know, we have to have constant monitoring of situations. And I must say that we now do much more serious economic monitoring of what is happening in different parts of the world and so on. But do we have any serious discussion about some of these about these things? Unfortunately, I have to say that we have to do much more at the national level as well as at the regional level in terms of moving forward.
Do you feel that some of the, I guess, typical actors, ministries of economy in ASEAN, ministries of international trade in ASEAN, ministries of foreign affairs in ASEAN, for instance, they really need to get their act together in terms of pushing forward these regional cooperation, either RCEP or ASEAN Plus 3, or even getting the Global South banding together and moving ahead, which is what you actually argued a few months ago in The Edge. We talked about Global South. Now is the time for them to act, considering that the Global North is in disarray. And is currently, being led by a disunited Europe and of course the White House that is, with Trump there. Do you think that these kind of ministries that I mentioned earlier, they should be the first movers instead of waiting from a top-down instruction from the respective presidents and prime ministers?
Well, the way ASEAN works, you have rotations of the chair every year. There is very little continuity in terms of working on issues. That is left to the Secretariat. And the Secretariat often doesn't have a mandate, and the mandates change from year to year. So how do we ensure that there's So what we have right now, and this is why I think we have a rare moment, we have a sense of crisis. Okay, certainly the plus 3 know that there's huge problem. The Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong, addressed the nation, won an election because of that. The Prime Minister of Australia also used the whole question, and the Prime Minister of Canada won an election which everybody was expecting him to lose, precisely because of recognizing that the world has changed and we better get our act together. So we have the wake-up call is there. Unfortunately, because of a lot of rhetoric about the same old, we don't have enough preparation for looking at this. But I think what can be done within the days which we have left is to basically open up an agenda for after the meetings later this month for ongoing work to begin. That's all the mandate which is needed. And the ministers and the ministries concerned know what needs to be done. Even if they don't know, there are people who are much more experienced, who feel threatened, who will remind the audience what needs to be done. But we need to be able to be much more agile. We just rely on the formal thing of who's the chair this year, who's the chair next year. And when you have a relatively small and weak country like Laos, for example, chairing, we need to have some kind of leadership which is not simply limited to the chair at any particular moment.
The logic, therefore, is rested in markets that are bigger, don't you think? I'm talking about, bigger in sense of market, which is probably Indonesia, bigger in sense of wealth, for instance, Singapore, bigger in sense of global connectivity like Malaysia. Other than these three countries, I don't know whether other ASEAN countries can actually take that commanding lead, say, for instance, the way Germany or France does in Europe.
Well, the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam was one of the first to contact Trump.
Yeah.
I think he made a bad deal with Trump. And I think they realized that in retrospect, they shouldn't have moved so quickly.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, Trump, you don't know what Trump really wants.
He doesn't know what he wants.
No, he don't underestimate him. The worst thing to do is to underestimate the other side. Okay. His style is shock and awe. Okay.
A raise tariff,
No, it's a bully.
Yeah.
It's a bullying tactic.
Yeah.
You want 10%, you demand 100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you negotiate down.
Yeah.
That is been his style in the past. And you look what he's prepared to settle for. You look, for example, during Trump 1.0. Okay. There was something called NAFTA. He wanted to get rid of NAFTA because he's against plurilateralism. He wants bilateral deals. Okay, what does that basically mean? Because he knows that when he's dealing with one country, he can bully them more easily. So we have to recognize that that's the way he wants to negotiate. That doesn't mean that we insist that you must negotiate with ASEAN. What it means is that ASEAN people have to get together to share information in order to be able to negotiate better. There are different ways you can deal with a particular situation, and there are mechanisms which I don't know about, but which presumably do exist, where countries are helping each other with this kind of intelligence. Okay, very often problems are very specific to a particular country, and they can learn from one or two other countries which may have had similar problems. But we don't have that kind of modesty about the need to learn from each other, the need to cooperate, and so on. That is what is sadly lacking. But I think we have an opportunity. We still have an opportunity with the few days which we have left to provide a mandate for ongoing work beyond the usual. Because if we keep on having these annual agendas, You know, you are chairman this year, you want to set your agenda. Another person's chairman the following year, or another country's chairman. You know, this is not the way to run a serious organization. You want to run a serious organization, you need to have ongoing work. And that ongoing work shouldn't be such that you, the only thing you can think of is, say, free trade. Free trade.
Yeah.
You know, we need to be much more creative. And right now, we don't have time. We are now in a defensive mode. Okay, and you're still talking about so-called, offensive strategies. You need to be able to deal with the real problems which we face now, rather than and there's a sense of urgency there, but these things are not going to be settled, next week. Okay, you need to have these kinds of discussions. So, given that those discussions may not have been initiated or concluded, what the ASEAN leaders can do is provide a mandate for going forward.
But drawing blank checks for their respective officials to work with could be counterintuitive. Should some of the policies that is going to be drafted once they give this mandate, this blank check, so to speak, it could run counterintuitive, or it could run something that is contrarian to what they want to achieve domestically. For instance, if, say, for instance, they say that from the summit we give a mandate on labour movement. Some governments are very uneasy with the notion of labour movement, free labour movement amongst ASEAN members intra-country. And then they say things like, commodities such as palm oil is being given priority. Then, Malaysia and Indonesia would be much more open to those ideas, but, I'm not too sure if other ASEAN members are going to be comfortable with that idea. So what I'm trying to argue here is, there could be conflicting interests coming in from everyone, so much so that, giving this fresh mandate or blank mandate, so to speak, might not necessarily be a feasible thing for these leaders to do, especially when we don't know what we want coming out of the outcome from this mandate.
I don't think we are talking about giving a blank mandate, a blank piece of paper, and you do whatever you want and then come back and report to me. No. What we really need to do is to recognize that there should be an ongoing
continuity, basically.
Yeah, there should be continuity and a readiness to change. Okay, it's not just continuity alone, nor change alone. We need both continuity and change. Okay, a change which is relevant, which is not only addresses new developments as we need to do right now, but also is forward-looking, to be able to anticipate and to move on. That we certainly need. Okay, and of course we need to reconsider the past. We may have committed to all kinds of things in the past without fully appreciating the implications. Now we have an opportunity to rethink them. I mean, take something like the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization was basically created in 1995 with a mandate which basically came about when there was all this wonderful dreams about what would be achieved through trade liberalization. Well, let's face it, the US has turned its back on trade liberalization. The Europeans have turned their back on trade liberalization. They have all kinds of protectionism under different names, or phytosanitary standards and for example,
all the same.
Carbon border adjustment mechanism and so on and so forth. But these are all new forms of protectionism, by other names, and we need to be able to talk to one another to help each other out. You take, for example, countries which still have forests. Okay. What they can achieve with the forest cover which they have. Countries which no longer have forests, what can be done? For example, in terms of reforestation. But I'm not talking about those kinds of things. Those kinds of things, if countries are not interested in cooperating, that's too bad. Right now we have we have a new situation which Mr. Trump has brought about. Okay, the old rules are all gone. We talk about rule of law and so on. What law?
Yeah.
World Trade Organization?
Yeah.
It's the only multilateral institution which has law. Okay. What law is Mr. Trump? Just because he calls it reciprocal doesn't make it reciprocal. Okay, everybody knows that. But the problem doesn't begin with Mr. Trump. Not even Trump 1.0. It began with Mr. Obama. Obama was the one who basically refused to allow, because there was a dispute settlement mechanism. One of the judges didn't rule in favor of the US. And they basically sabotaged the whole dispute settlement mechanism, which barely functions today. So, these are simple things. And then if you pretend as if, the dispute settlement mechanism is fine, so on.
We can have all this delusion all we want.
Exactly. So now we need to be able to think about what are the alternatives we are going to build. To talk about the global south, frankly, I mean, I'm a great advocate, as you have emphasized, but right now we don't even have an institution. That's why I'm very keen.
We do the non-aligned movement, for instance.
When was the last time the non-aligned movement?
I remember when I was growing up, there was a big conference.
When you were growing up, when I was growing up as well. But what is happening today with the non-aligned movement? Can you tell me one thing which non-aligned movement did? Nobody seems to know. Okay, in the recent past, partly because it has been led by governments which are considered marginal. Nobody wants to be associated with Iran. Nobody wants to be associated with Cuba, and so on and so forth. I mean, this is the problem right now. That's why Bandung anniversary is so important. This is the time to revisit non-alignment and to elaborate a non-alignment in what is supposedly a multipolar world. The first non-alignment was for a bipolar world. Okay. Now that world doesn't exist anymore. We really need to rethink all these institutions and to work for the challenges of our times and to be willing to revise whatever institutions we create. We might create a situation now, and in 4 years' time, Trump's successor may change the games again. The game again. We need to be able to be agile. Half the time we are dreaming about the past instead about looking to the future.
I mean, romanticizing about the past is a good pastime, isn't it? We'll take a pause for now. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll continue on with this riveting conversation with Professor K.S. Jomo. We'll be right back after these messages.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
Thanks for staying on with us. I have with me Professor Jomo Kwame Sundaram, the research advisor of the Khazanah Research Institute. The thinking right now is romanticizing about the past is it's like a bad habit that we can't get rid of. But at the same time, there's a lot of promise that can be talked about when we talk about how young ASEAN is in terms of its demographic profile. Singapore and Malaysia may be facing an aging or aged nation respectively, but not the rest of ASEAN. We're looking at the population pyramid at a very nice distribution isosceles triangle. Countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, young nations. Do you feel that these markets might breed fresh and interesting leaders that could take us forward in the decades to come? Where does your hope lie when it comes to the folks within ASEAN? Can they actually achieve a greater world with a more broader, I guess, sense of boundaries the way you envision it to be?
I think the first thing to do is to stop thinking of economies simply as markets. Okay? Before people can buy anything, they need incomes. Where are incomes going to come from? We need to think about raising people's incomes in the region. Okay? I think it is no longer true that that there's no aging in some of the other economies of the region. Look at the Indonesian population's growth rate. Indonesian population's growth rate is lower than Malaysian population growth rate. Okay? And it's also true of some of the other countries. So I think we are looking at a situation where sooner or later there is going to be an aging population and so on. But right now we have a lot of people who do not have jobs, let alone fulfilling jobs, and certainly not decent incomes. We need to think about how that is to be achieved. And very importantly, I think we need to specifically think about increasing manufacturing jobs. And so there is tremendous potential for increasing manufacturing jobs. Now, what are these jobs going to be like? We have a situation where some jobs are now moving out of China to this part of the world. Now, there was a time long ago when jobs moved from Southeast Asia, from countries like Malaysia, to China.
Yeah.
You know, and what has happened is that we have remained static. Chinese labor has been much more trained, much more educated, and much more productive as a consequence. So what are we doing? And if this is a problem which is a shared problem, we need to do much more about this. So you cannot have somebody like Mr. Musk, for example, coming in and destroying our education and training system. I'm not saying that the present education and training systems are fine. A lot needs to be done, you know, but that has to be done. Take, for example, some of the innovations which are happening within the region. Many of the innovations, particularly in agriculture, are not happening in the old agricultural countries. You know, I mean, most of the innovations, as far as say oil palm is concerned, are happening in Indonesia. There might be Malaysians who are doing that work in Indonesia, but it is happening in Indonesia. So what is it? So we have a lot of talk about, oh, we must have more R&D and so on and so forth. But what are we doing concretely to improve innovation? What are we concretely doing to improve productivity? And what are we doing to improve incomes? If you do not improve incomes, people are not going to be motivated to study more and so on and so forth. So this is very important. If we look at the huge increase in incomes in China, it has been partly accompanied by less people, not more people, less people being in agriculture and more people in manufacturing. That is for a huge population. Okay, what are we doing about that in the region? Well, I don't think ASEAN, for example, is been known for example, for great, as an institution, for doing much as far as education is concerned, as innovation is concerned, and so on.
Yeah.
But we should have these kinds of cooperative arrangements, which countries can participate in, and they don't need to be part of the ASEAN arrangements per se, but it's a starting point from which we can learn. And this is where I emphasize once again the importance of ASEAN +3, of RCEP, and so on. Why can't these institutions be involved in this kind of thing? You know, if we look, for example, historically, we have been caught partly during the so-called First and Second Cold Wars of not cooperating with say, for example, if you're cooperating with China, you don't cooperate with Japan. Fortunately, ASEAN has not been stuck in this kind of problem. The rest of the world has been. But cooperation between China and Japan was unthinkable. But now China realizes that they are being that what is happening now is that they are trying to condemn China to the fate of Japan. Japan, there was a post-war miracle which ended around 1990 due to a number of.
And then you have the lost generation, the lost decade.
Yeah.
So
China, has learned from that era.
Of stagnation.
Yeah, and they want to avoid it by all means. Okay, they want to avoid it by all means. So now they are realizing that perhaps this is the time to reconsider their options. There was a prime minister of Japan just a few years ago who wanted Japan to be firmly in the U.S. camp and take on China. Look at who is now in the South China Sea. Yeah, it's European countries. The UK built 2 aircraft carriers, one of which has been deployed to this part of the world. Who invited them? They said they were withdrawing east of Suez in the 1960s. This is more than half a century later, and they are back. Germany, not known as being a naval power, except during the brief period of
Bismarck and the gang.
Of Habibi. Habibi was very keen. They bought over some of the old East German ships and so on and so forth. But Germany is here. Okay, why should they have a battleground in our part of the world? I'm not saying that we don't have problems in this part of the world. We should resolve those problems. Look at what has happened now in the Philippines. There are 4 additional military bases which have been approved by the Philippine government, which they have already started building. 3 of them are in the northern part of the country, very close to Taiwan. Okay, what is ASEAN doing about that? We have claimed to be a zone of peace, freedom, and neutrality, but we are taking sides.
Speaking about Zopfan.
Sorry?
Speaking about Zopfan, zone of freedom, peace, freedom, and neutrality. Do you think that this is a dead dream already? That we should really think about how to, update this particular idea now?
Well, I think it's gone for a long nap, but it is more relevant than ever.
Today?
Yes. The world is going to war, even as we speak, And who are the people who are committed to? Okay, maybe we're not doing very much about it, but at least we say we are. Okay, and what are we doing about neutrality in this region? Okay, we should call them out. When Carlos Romulo was the foreign minister of Philippines and committed to Zopfan, the Philippines was very much part of it. And by the end of the 20th century, the Philippines got rid of all the American bases in the Philippines. Now they have 11, and possibly more are going to be there. So we have to rethink what we are doing in the region. It's all very well to say that we are committed to Zopfan, but we do nothing about it. I think we have to be very serious about not getting involved in the fights between the bigger powers. We want to remain neutral. We want to remain non-aligned. And we don't want to get involved in these conflicts. And at the same time, China should show sincerity in terms of resolving the disputes which we have in this part of the world. Okay, but
they seem to be the most instigating force in these
conflicts. If you believe American propaganda or Western
9-9 is still there, the Spratly Islands, atoll is still there. It's not propaganda, Prof.
No, those are claims, okay? And these claims should be negotiated. Okay. What are we doing about negotiating them? If they're not serious, you can look at a glass as half full or half empty.
Yeah. Okay. Come from a place of good faith when it comes to negotiating.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's face it. China also claims that they are for globalization. China also claims that they are for peace and they are for the rule of law.
Yeah.
Okay, on those 3 grounds alone, you can go to them.
Yeah.
Okay, China is criticizing the West for not taking the rule of law seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
So we take the rule of law seriously. Let's go and negotiate this, okay? But, you know, so it's all very well to just, you know, I mean, we need to find some way of resolving this problem. I'm not saying that the problem, we can just wish the problems will go away, okay? But let's face it, you had, I think it was 2020, you know, people trying to start a little war in this part of the world, okay, in order to get the president re-elected. Okay, the Secretary of State at that time, you know, who's now no longer part of his administration, was proposing a little war, and there was a foreign minister in this country and the former foreign minister. The former foreign minister said that there were over 1,000 incursions from China. The minister said there were no incursions from China of record. So now, I mean, you have people who want war, okay, even in this country, okay. So we basically need to look at these issues. You know, I'm not happy with what big powers are doing, okay, but we need to find ways of resolving this without going to war.
Let's do an examination of some of the key actors that is going to emerge from this summit. The main key actor, I suppose, would be our own Prime Minister. There's also President Prabowo. Lawrence Wong might come up as an interesting figure from this particular summit because of his recent election results. Do you think that these kind of individuals would move the needle in terms of trying to achieve a more robust, sustainable and meaningful achievements or at least dialogue that can be carried forward in the months, if not years to come? Do you have hope that any of these kind of leaders, in fact, outside of these three, for instance, smaller nations, would be inspirational enough for the region to actually coalesce and rally behind their messages? Or it's just run-of-the-mill kind of actors?
I think Prime Minister Wong is still a relatively unknown quantity. He has made some very interesting remarks in response to what has happened in the last 7 weeks. And it'll be very interesting to see what he will do in Singapore. But I don't see him really trying to provide regional leadership. But the fact that Singapore is very concerned about what happened 7 weeks ago opens up an opportunity to bring Singapore back into ASEAN rather than them going it alone. Okay, because they, you know, Singapore was not hit by the Trump tariffs. Okay, and yet they took that position. You know, so we basically had all these people going off in different directions, right? You have the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Vietnam contacting Trump, and Trump was very proud of it, and so on. And you have Lawrence Wong, whom has historically they have been the most pro-American. You know, suddenly expressing concern and dissent. So we have a very, I mean, the pieces on the board are very different from what they used to be. You know, and we cannot just presume that they will, that the world has not changed.
But what about your examination on PMX as well as Prabowo?
You see, you know, the PMX has got so much on his plate. Okay, you know, he has to. It's not clear to me that he has a strong, coherent team who are supporting him well. Okay, different people are doing different things, and it's not clear to me that there is a very clear strategic view of going forward. More generally, as far as ASEAN is concerned, I think that the same could be said. I mean, but this, you know, right now besides the photo ops, what are we going to get out of
the
this?
Substantial stuff, the substantive stuff, I mean.
That remains a little unclear, partly because a lot of things are still being negotiated. But the kind of leadership which is needed, you know, it's not going to be easy for PMX to get everybody on board for much of. Let us say that PMX agenda is along the lines which I was discussing. Even that is not going to be easy. How does the PMX persuade the Philippines to remember Zopfan? You know, I mean, Bong Bong's father was the president when Zopfan was declared. But that kind of sentimentalism is not going to get us very far, right? So don't expect too much from that. I think, to be fair to PMX, you can only deal with the cards which you have. You cannot do much more than that. But at the same time, and this is why I emphasize giving a mandate for ongoing cooperation becomes so crucial.
That survives you, that survives
that is
the administration, so to speak.
That basically enhances ASEAN capacity to address issues over the medium term.
Hence the ASEAN +3, hence the RCEP, hence all the other regional or global.
ASEAN +3 does not necessarily follow. I'm suggesting that be the big emphasis going forward. Because let's face it, no matter how big you think ASEAN is, it's relatively still quite small. Okay? But ASEAN +3, you can be sure it's going to be taken very, very seriously. Getting cooperation on the ASEAN +3 level is going to be very tough. Okay? But PMX can go down in history as the one who basically enabled that. Okay?
Do you think he will realize this prospect?
I don't know. I'm not part of the government. I have not seen him. I have not spoken to him since he became Prime Minister. You know.
Yeah. Final question, Prof. Jomo. We've discussed a lot here. What would be some of your messages when it comes to talking to the youth of ASEAN? You are held in high regard based on the conversation that we've had together when we were in, was it University Malaya that we were last together with a group of students at Sasana Kijang. They were all in awe with you. They all, have you in high regard. They are all waiting for some wise words from the sage on top of the mountain to share with them, the secrets of the universe. What would be some of your messages to these young folk that is eager and able and wanting to do change?
I'm not sure. I've thought very much about this.
Oh, they've thought about you a lot, though.
You're very kind and flattering me, but I'm not so sure. I think the student culture, I left the university more than 2 decades ago. I'm really quite out of touch with contemporary student culture. But I do think that there isn't the kind of anti-colonial fervor which was so important to Prime Minister's generation, my generation, and so on. I think we really don't have that kind, and take for example the clothes which were being worn by the audience, student audience. Everybody was wearing a suit. Some without ties, perhaps, but they were wearing suits. I mean, students, when we were students of my generation, I mean, basically we're talking about very different student culture, right? What people aspire to and so on and so forth. So I think it's very difficult for me to address those kinds of concerns, but I think what has happened undoubtedly is that for a lot of young people, one of the big problems in Malaysia, of course, is everything is ethnicized, okay, and ethnopopulism is very strong. But when people have a chance to think about bigger issues which shape their lives, they begin to realize how irrelevant ethnopopulism is as an option. So it's largely sustained by the political types, okay? So you have a very strong, so you have people trying to understand and make sense of this world. And we do not have enough people writing, talking about it, There are very few people, for example, who even know the history of our country. Last year, for example, was the 150th anniversary of the Bangkok Treaty, which transformed this country. How many discussions did you hear about the Bangkok Treaty and its impact on this country? The Sultan of Perak wrote a whole book, more than 500 pages, seriously trying to discuss some of the consequences of the Bangkok Treaty and similar colonial actions. Most people in this country don't even know that in the half decade after World War II, Malaya, okay, Peninsular Malaysia now, contributed 70% of the foreign exchange earnings of the entire British Empire, of the so-called Sterling Zone. People don't know that. Okay? You have generations of people studying economics, for example, who don't even know anything about the Malaysian economy because economics has been reduced to formulas and graphical representations.
Yeah, econometrics, basically. Yeah.
No, not economic. I actually have a lot more respect for econometrics than, but a lot of mathematical stuff.
Rather than the stories and the philosophies behind.
Let me give you a slightly different example. In the old days, to become what do you call it, a diplomat, you studied international relations, you study other cultures, and so on and so forth. Today, what do? You study international relations, you study what is called game theory. What is game theory? Game theory is basically a zero-sum game. If I'm going to win, you must lose. That's the way it is. So the whole mentality of people who are being trained is very different. We are not looking for win-win outcomes. Okay? Over a century ago, at the end of World War II, Keynes, probably the greatest economist of the 20th century.
Keynes,
yeah. Keynes basically said that you take away everything from Germany, Germany is going to resent you like anything, and they're going to come back. And what happened?
Yeah.
We had Nazism, fascism, and World War II. And Keynes was correct. Of course, Keynes, being British, didn't see, for example, that had nothing to say about the fact that the Shantung Peninsula didn't go back to China, even though China sent tens of thousands of troops to participate in the war. And Shantung Peninsula was taken from Germany and not given back to China, it was given to Japan. This triggered what is called the May 4th movement and the Chinese Revolution 3 decades later. Okay, you know, but people, or look at what happened in Africa. African countries which were colonized by Germany, they were given to Europeans to manage.
The African scramble for Africa, was it?
Well, no, scramble of Africa was late 19th century, but I'm talking about the after World War One. Okay, so Namibia, what is now Namibia, was taken back and given to South Africa because you have white-skinned people running the country, and that was what happened. Tanganyika, which is now part of Tanzania, was also taken away from the Germans and given to the British. Okay, Africans were not considered capable of running their own countries. I mean, this is the kind of mentality which prevailed. But how many students today are thinking about these kinds of issues? How many people are talking about these issues? There's a man now who's shaking up West Africa. He speaks mainly in French, Ibrahim Traoré, who's the leader of Burkina Faso. You know, he's inspiring a whole generation of francophone Africans. But almost nobody else seems to know. You know, now you have more easy access to facilities to do translation and interpretation than ever before. How much do you know? You know, I can get so much more information more easily thanks to various technical developments. But, you know, unfortunately, there's very little interest. People are more knowledgeable of what's happening in certain parts of the world, you know, but they don't know about what else is happening, you know. So you have a very selective view of what is happening in the world. And, you know, even in terms of Muslim discourse, the situation is sad. I mean, you have a situation now where Yemen is the only country left in the world which is resisting Israel. Okay? And a decade ago, Malaysia joined the 40-country coalition which was trying to overthrow the government of Yemen.
Before we conclude this, Prof, are you attending the ASEAN Summit?
No, I don't go to these things. I don't get invited, and it's okay. I'm not trying to get an invitation.
Do you feel that, at the very least, in a very short, brief moment, are you optimistic about this, or is it just going to be something that you heard?
I think the Prime Minister has made a number of remarks which are very promising. Okay?
And therefore you're holding on to that?
Well,
hope that this will turn out substantive.
I mean, let's hope that it's not going to be one of those speeches which are drafted by people who don't even understand the substantive issues and, you know, has all the correct quotations and so on. And then, you know, I mean, this speech, for example, he gave in Tsinghua. Okay? I wasn't there. But, you know, he spoke very eloquently. Obviously, he knew what he was talking about, you know. But almost nobody else in the government seemed to know what he was saying.
Fell on deaf ears, basically.
Sorry?
Fell on deaf ears.
Yeah.
Fell on deaf ears.
Yeah. No, I'm not. Well, they were not there. Okay. But it is sad that nobody in the government had anything to say to elaborate. They just didn't know. They just didn't know. Okay. So you begin to worry about the level of coordination and implementation which is going on. It's all well and good to have, you know, fine speeches, you know.
But the follow-through.
Sorry?
But the follow-through would be left for one thing.
Yeah. And then you have, you know, various ministers, you know, trying to sound clever and singing the latest buzzwords of the day, you know, it's not very helpful. So the coherence of governance is a major issue. But he has a lot of concerns about governance, and I hope these extend to these kinds of issues as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jomo. That was Professor Jomo Kwame Sundaram, the Khazanah Research Institute's research advisor. Here at Astro AWANI, we'll be covering the ASEAN Summit live on location, so do stick with us throughout the 2 days that is taking place here in Kuala Lumpur. Also, if you've missed any part of these interviews or interviews such as this, just head on to Astro AWANI and look for The Economy or search for my name, Ibrahim Sani, on that website. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.